Lately, I've reviewed a few mobile ports, and a part of me is getting a bit sick of these mobile ports on the Switch because they are always so half-assed, and they're just never any good quality. So does Blade 2 Return of Evil continue these poor attempts at a cash grab? Stick around for my review. Blade 2 is published and developed by Action Square, and it's a top-down action RPG similar to games like Diablo and Torchlight, and your mission in this game is to basically stop the evil spreading around the world. That's as cliche as it gets, right? The game has 4 generic classes in the Gladiator, Assassin, Wizard, and Fighter, who, by the way, are all gender lock. We start off with the Gladiator, and the Gladiator is a melee sword wielder who pulls off combos with his 2 giant swords. Then we have the Fighter, who is your monk melee class who performs all his damage with his 2 fists and legs, performing chi-based moves. Then we have our range class, the Wizard, who performs spells and abilities from a distance. She can freeze enemies, use magic beams, and even reflect damage defensively. And last but not least, we have the Assassin, who I did my full playthrough. She dual wields katanas and does all her damage with those katanas, but she also does stealth-based moves that she uses to kind of evade and run away from the fights. All 4 of these classes have skill trees with abilities that unlock as you level, which you get by purchasing gold that you get from drops in every stage. These abilities range from doing your basic attacks, and even though I'm calling it basic, it's an extremely fancy set of combos each class possesses. Then you have the defensive abilities, and these typically do a high amount of damage, but also intended to save you and possibly crowd control the mobs that are all around you. Then you have the offensive ability meant to do a high amount of damage, and these abilities can range from just doing pure damage at a high clip, or in my case, I used mine to not only do high damage, but also crowd control the enemies. Then you have a survival move that is different for each class. For the Assassin, it was a way to enter stealth to heal for a short period of time and stay hidden. For the Monk, it will be a move that focuses his chi to heal himself and give himself a defensive boost. That also goes for the Gladiator, and the Wizard gets a deflect damage plus a heal. Then each character gets a passive ability for each category of offensive, defensive, and a boost to your counter move. Each character has the ability to do a counterattack if you time the enemy's offense. If you're able to perform this successfully, the game rewards you with a move that does high damage, crowd control, and the ability to heal for a little if you put talent points into it. And last but certainly not least, each character has 3 different ultimate abilities. While you can only equip 1, these abilities are meant to be huge, devastating moves that do a ton of damage and crowd control the entire area. These have 1-minute cooldowns and require some combos to be built up to get the charge. There's not a ton of variation with the skill tree, but you can for the most part change some of these abilities and swap them out with something different that can work for your playstyle. If you're looking for more damage, or if you're looking for a bit more crowd control, the options are there. As for the combat itself, like with any ARPG, this is the absolute bread and butter of any successful and fun action RPG. Essentially, you want to build up a ton of combo points to get a neat crit buff that stays with you as long as you keep the combo points up. All your abilities, with the exception of the basic attack, contain pretty long cooldowns, making it more of a strategy as to when you use these abilities, and not something you can spam like in any other typical action RPG. Your ultimate ability will serve as the big finisher for when you just need a ton of damage, or in my case, I would save it for the mini bosses who could be very hard to kill, or some of the more harder to kill mobs throughout the level. The combat is this game's biggest strength, and while it's different than any other ARPG I'm used to, it really flows well, and the animations of the abilities are probably some of the best action animations I've seen on the Switch. Pretty much everything you do looks like a fancy choreographed hard-hitting ability. But the thing I like the most with the combat, especially as I got into the end game, is that I really had to learn how to play my character and really time my moves correctly to survive. I had to be really clever and use my abilities in certain combos and in ways to really maximize the potential of my tune, because the game was very difficult, especially as I got into the later stages. But where the apparent mobile aspects of this game kick in is in the very small and limited level designs in this game. While there is 7 acts with each having 10 stages, you're often going to find repeating stages and levels within the same act. While I feel the environments are nice looking, when you constantly see the same hallways, it does get a little old. You'll also typically find the same kind of enemies in each level within the acts. You'll get used to certain mobs and how they behave after just a few levels. At the end of each stage, you'll find the mini-bosses, and these mini-bosses act like rare blue or yellow epic mobs you see in other action role-playing games. You'll typically recognize these mini-bosses because they're just beefed-up normal mobs you see throughout the normal encounters. I personally didn't hate this, as this is something that you typically see in any action RPG, beefed-up normal enemies. Only in this game they become mini bosses at the end of the stage. But as you continue through the acts, you'll face one boss at the halfway point at around stage 5, then you hit stage 10 and you face a final act boss, which were usually extremely hard and fun to tackle. As for the difficulty, this is an aspect I did enjoy. The game was pretty hard from the second act on up. Now some of this was depending on bad loot drops, but had more to do with the learning curve and how to engage certain encounters, because some of the mobs were just harder hitting and harder to deal with if you didn't properly strategize to beat them. Now with any loot-based game, sometimes you can just overpower these with good loot, but if you're facing a normal trajectory of getting okay loot, you will easily find yourself having to repeat some of the content in hopes of passively leveling your character and just hope for better loot so that way you can get through the levels. The bosses in this game are a ton of fun, and there was a ton of unique ones. With 7 at the end of the acts and 7 at the halfway acts, you had 14 different bosses, not including some of the mini ones that you had at the end of each stage. Oh, and I don't think that I mentioned that I was only on story mode, which is just the normal difficulty. So I actually struggled mightily through the story mode with the difficulty on normal mode. It's going to definitely be interesting to see how this plays out in the harder difficulties. But one of the other cool features in this game that totally surprised me, because you won't see them in the main menu, is tower mode and rifts. If you're not familiar with a tower mode, the tower mode is a fight to survive encounter in a tower. If you survive it and beat the boss at the end, the game rewards you with the relic equipment, which is the highest tiered armored in the game. These towers typically cost gold to enter, which is hard to save on your first playthrough because you're using so many to purchase abilities. But these were really fun and I think matched the difficulty for the rewards you get. It's almost essential to take a break from the story and hit these to help you advance. Now, if you did lose your round in the tower mode, you would lose your money. So there is an actual risk versus reward factor with the tower mode, which I personally loved. Then you have rifts, which are completely random encounters that you get after a stage is done. These rifts consist of you facing a special unique boss that you fight, and if you win this encounter, you're rewarded with a trinket-based gear that only drops from the rifts and not the levels. If you lose, you end up losing out on the loot. These were a lot of fun at the start, but became a bit tedious, but I'll cover this a little bit more later. As for the loot, this is an ARPG after all. These games aren't as fun without random generated loot. This part of the game is another parent mobile port influence, as you get loot at the end of finishing a stage. There is no random loot drops at any given point like a Diablo or Torchlight game. The loot itself is randomized by quality, but you can only get one piece of loot per stage, and if you die and don't beat the stage, you get absolutely no loot. The loot itself has randomized properties ranging from damage increases to crit boosts to lifesteal to reduced range or reduced melee damage. The loot was honestly not too bad, but not too exciting either. It had enough variation for me to not complain and say it was too generic, but the lower level loot was too plain and boring, only typically having one stat on it or none at all if it was a gray item. The loot quality ranged from normal to relic, with the epic, legend, and relic quality actually having multiple tiered stats on them. Relic quality gear also being the only gear in the game that had a collection set bonuses attached to them. For the most part, I had my moments of annoyance with the loot. One reason I love Diablo-style games is because you get a lot of loot, and at any point you can get that cool piece that is a game changer for your character. This game gives you that in small doses if you're lucky to get a high-quality piece of loot outside of the towers. The loot also has no special abilities that can enhance your character outside of just plain offensive and defensive stat boosts. As for some of the negative breakdowns in this game, I for one did not like to see the constant repeat corridors in this game. For the most part, the levels themselves were nice to look at, but there was too many times things looked the same and they were just repeats. The rift mechanics in this game at first excited me, but as it went on, I think this part ended up being really bugged out, and I hope it gets fixed because it would get to the point where I would beat these encounters in under 15 seconds, and I don't think that was intended. As I got to the final stages, I started to have a lot of crashes, including when I killed the final boss, which sucked. And then towards the last two acts, in general, the game started to run like complete and utter poo. I had some really bad FPS issues that forced me to restart a few times to try to get a handle on it. But the game has a lot of hours to be had here, which shocked me. It took me around 15 hours to beat the story mode difficulty, and I still hadn't even hit the hard and hell difficulties yet. With most ARPGs, once you beat the storyline the first time, you'll be running through it again in higher difficulties to hit the level cap, grind higher level gears, but unlike other ARPGs, I'm assuming the game ends there. The only thing remaining, I think, in this game is going to be tackling the towers and farming your best loot there. There is no other content after that, and there's no multiplayer, which is frankly a shame. But overall, I really enjoyed my time with Blade 2, much to my shock, as this game is a mobile port. While it's not like any other ARPG I've played, I felt, for me personally, it felt fresh enough in some aspects, especially the combat, that I really got into it. The boss fights, if they weren't dropping bad in FPS, were extremely enjoyable, and I honestly got my butt kicked due to bad play and not strategizing the encounter correctly. The animations and the ultimate moves feel very epic, and I would like to see this combat more in action RPGs. Unlike other ARPGs, sometimes you only end up using one or two moves that you build your entire character on, but in this game you had to utilize every single ability to beat an encounter. There's a lot of hours of gameplay to be had here, not to mention if you're actually wanting to grind out other characters to see how they perform. But the game for me is getting a solid 6.5 out of 10. I wouldn't call this game bad. I wouldn't say it's the best thing ever. I got my enjoyment out of this $25 game, and it does have high quality combat gameplay, but for other aspects the mobile port feels is just too apparent, and you can see it and feel its limitations. For a mobile port to get this high a rating is high praise in my book, because I've murdered a few mobile ports just in this past month. If you're in the market for a fresh action RPG, I do recommend this game. Just don't expect a game changer with this one. But that is going to be it for me on this review. If you enjoyed this review, consider subbing to the channel if you're new for more game reviews and gameplay videos of brand new games. If you could also kindly consider smashing that like button, it helps others find this review and my content. But I want to say thank you for watching. If you guys agree with me that this game is a decent port, let me know in the comments down below. Or if you think it's complete trash, let me know in the comments down below. But from the bottom of my heart, I hope all of you have a sunny day.